Something big is shifting. You can feel it. You want to stay informed, but you also want to smash your phone. I'm Allison Hare, a podcast strategist, and this is Culture Changers. Here is where we talk with smarts and snark about all the stuff they say not to talk about: power, politics, religion, relationships through the lens of pop culture. And of course, we are talking about cults and trad wives too. If you're wondering what to do with all of this, you might just be a culture changer. Are you being radicalized? Better yet, I should ask, are people around you, maybe your Aunt Peggy from Thanksgiving, they've expressed a little concern over your opposing views? Or there might be people that you know that you thought they were reasonable and cool, and now they have kind of fallen prey to the brainwashing. You know, things are really, really different now. I don't need to tell you that. And I asked a simple question on Facebook, and the question was, where do you get your news? What are sources that you trust? And through my very unscientific study, it proved a hunch I have. And what had come back was that not one person listed a single source of truth. But what they did list was a bunch of strategies on how they corroborate and figure out what is the truth. So if everyone has a mic, how do you know who to trust? And so the answers that came back were surprising. I mean, I don't know if they were surprising. They may sound familiar, actually. And it was, I cross-check my information. I do follow specific journalists. And some people are like, I don't trust anybody. I trust not one source, not one person. I verify everything. I'm trying to piece it all together to figure out what is the truth? What is it that I need to know? Obviously, we are not in a monoculture anymore. That ship has gone bye-bye a long time ago. So where do we get our news in 2026? You know, what are the trends that help us stay informed, not kill each other, but also have some semblance of sanity? Well, there's one thing I can't promise is sanity. We're going to do the best that we can. I feel like everyone is you know what? We're just going to ride it out and figure it out as best we can. But when I started to pull the data, so I looked up the most non-biased and credible sources I could: Pew Research, Reuters, and Wall Street Journal. I started to put together what are the trends that are going on here. And I thought it would be helpful for us to know, because so much of this stuff that I started to see was oh my God, no wonder. No wonder everyone is confused and angry at each other and trying to figure out what is what. And at the same time, what I thought was interesting, according to the Pew Research Center and Reuters Institute, social media has officially overtaken TV as the primary way Americans get their news. So I know it probably isn't shocking, right? And, you know, I wonder about, why are there so many smart, thoughtful people feeling so unsettled? And I know that if you're listening to this podcast, you are smart, you are educated, you are strong, you are confident. You are trying to figure out the best way that you can. You may have your own systems, your own strategies, your own mechanisms that help you. And also, you know, you do have the right to put your head in the sand sometimes and make it all go away for a second and focus on your own life. So I want to leave room for that as well. But I wanted to talk about some of the surprising things that I found. So if we're going to do a little quick history. So when you think about Trump and Republicans in general, I guess based on the studies, they are generally more suspicious, less trusting of news sources. And then Trump would blast since 2015, 2014, even the birtherism. You know, the news is crooked. Everybody is lying, right? Don't trust media. They're all run by big corporations. It's a witch hunt, all lies. And then Hillary Clinton loses to Trump. Kamala Harris loses to Trump. And people don't want establishment Democrats. They definitely don't want women in power either. And what's interesting is that I think everyone can agree there are no news sources that are trustworthy when you think of mainstream media. And so there was always a beef with mainstream media. I think it's caught up to everybody. So there is like a trust recession or a trust de-evolution, devolving. What is the word? A degradation of truth. That part is to nobody. But what's interesting is the way that people describe it are used in very radical, extreme terms, meaning the word radical. I don't even know what a deep state is. I don't even know what constitutes as an elite. And so if I'm hearing Donald Trump Jr. talk about the crooked elites, and I'm like, aren't you like the definition of elite? Somebody that is, was born wealthy and, like has all the privilege in the world, a white male, like I don't even know. And so I think some of these terms are thrown around in a way to kind of villainize others, right? Like it always is, how do we dehumanize and villainize others? And so what we know is that the edges are winning. Issues that you thought were fringe and would never see the light of day from a smaller but louder and more persistent majority are winning. Are most people radical? Absolutely not. I'm somebody who's left-leaning. I consider myself moderate. I don't consider myself extreme, and I am around and friends with people that totally believe opposite things. They have voted differently than I did. But generally speaking, when we have conversations, we all want the same things. So some of these extreme things are really interesting. I do feel like politics and religion are being weaponized for the benefit of each other, meaning religion is weaponized for the benefit of politics. Politics are weaponized for the benefit of religion. I think they are common bedfellows here. But I find myself seeking the news, whereas before, like, I never watch the news. I don't watch CNN. My husband always has, something on. He always has the news on. And he grew up in a house where his dad would watch Fox News in the kitchen and his mom would watch CNN in the family room. And she would, the mother, my mother-in-law, would call Fox News the yelling channel. And I thought it was interesting. And so my husband grew up in a house where the news was just on. It was like background noise. But I always thought it was, kind of dumb. Like, what are you going to do about it? You're just, it's designed to enrage you, right? So all of that mainstream media is designed to get a rise out of you, not to play it down the middle. And so it has become entertainment. It has become like WWE, but in the news format through journalists. And I find myself where I'm not watching mainstream news. And you'll be interested in some of the studies that I found as well on this too. But I find myself consuming the news like a Coke addict these days. I'm more drawn to personality-based news sources. And I feel like, God, it's so interesting that when Biden was in office, it was so nice not to like be flooded constantly with holy shit, now what? Where the news is just at such a breakneck pace where, now again, it just is getting faster and faster and faster. So, I think from a news perspective, it's hard because I want sometimes to put my head in the sand, but at the same time, I have a platform called Culture Changers, where the entire purpose of this podcast is to change the culture and to lean in. And I think more and more of us are realizing that, when people say, I don't do politics, bullshit, because politics are everywhere. And when they talk about, you shouldn't talk about money, sex, politics, religion, right? They say those are the things you should never talk about in polite company. But I feel that because we were taught never to talk about it, they are what define us. They are where we get our values from. They are reflections, I should say, of what our values are. So we're hiding all of this in the dark. And when Trump came in office, and then all of a sudden people started to share, like, I don't believe this, or I do believe this. We're like, what? I had no idea. And we would assign judgment, whatever side you fell on it. And like, you don't do politics, but politics are doing you. And I think it does us a disservice to not talk about it. And again, I know that there are limits. Like, I come from a family where, like, it probably is split down the middle of who believes what. And so we aren't like going head to head over, trying to convince each other of our beliefs, but we are allowing each other to exist, right? Like, we can talk about it. We can acknowledge that somebody else may not believe, but we aren't calling each other idiots. We aren't calling each other like we're a brainwashed dumbass, right? And so what's interesting is that personality trust is king right now, where platform trust is low, low, low. And what I mean by that is people don't say, well, I trust CNN. That is the station for me, or Fox, or Meta, or X. You know why? Because their billionaire owners are manipulating what we see. And so it almost becomes the cult of personality of who owns it, whether it's Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or Donald Trump for True Social or whatever it is. All of those things. And again, the cable wars that are happening right now are really going to severely impact the kind of information that we are even allowed to have, with the White House, like restricting and repressing the kind of information that they want shared. So the truth is nowhere to be found, honestly. And so Reuters had called out the rise of an alternative ecosystem of YouTubers, TikTokers, and podcasters. Hello. So for under 30, social is now the front door for news. So if you're under 30, that is where people are getting their news from. They found Americans 18 to 29 are far more likely to get news from social. 76%, at least sometimes, than adults who are over 65 plus. So adults over 65, only 28%. And that makes sense. Like, I think everybody's parents are watching Fox News nonstop. Everybody's parents. Mine were the same. What's interesting is my father was staying in a house where Fox News was always on. So my father would talk about, he would kind of parrot what he heard. My father has dementia. And so what's interesting is to see his decline. He would watch Fox News. He would talk about how he likes Trump, how he he would call him beaten. He would call Biden beaten. I don't like that beaten. He's bad for our country. My father's Lebanese, so he has so if I feel like I'm talking in an accent because he has very thick Arabic accent. And then he moves to a memory care center, and I would come in his room and he'd have CNN on. And all of a sudden he is singing a different tune, like, oh, the Democrats don't really like JD Vance. He's really going to have a problem. It's so interesting to see how this constant barrage of news really does impact what you're going to do. So let's talk about what is going on for what's on deck for 2026 when it comes to the news. Number one, video platforms aren't social. They are the new TV. And this is the same goes for podcasts too. And what they found among 18 to 29-year-olds in the US, Pew reports regular news use is now clustered across TikTok, which accounts for 43%. 43%. YouTube is 41%, and Instagram is 40%. Facebook, 41%. And I think what's interesting about this, what people are leaning on socials for is not like reading the news. They want explainer videos. And so the explainer videos are really, really helping people kind of decipher when there is such a flood of it. Number two, news influencers are becoming the primary layer of distribution. So, what I mean by this is Pew Research found that 38% of adults under 30 say they regularly get their news from news influencers. So, let's talk about this in real terms. When you think about independent news journalists, and you think there has been a mass exodus of news journalists that have left CNN, that have left all the mainstream media, Don Lemon, Joy Reid, Katie Couric, Piers Morgan, Ben Shapiro. I don't think Ben Shapiro was on mainstream news, but he is a big force in the right wing. Megyn Kelly, Jim Acosta, Heather Cox Richardson, Aaron Parnas. The I've Had It ladies. I don't know if you've heard of them, but God, they are blowing up right now. I'm actually going to do a full episode on why their show is blowing up right now. And that is run by Jennifer Welch and Angie Pump Sullivan. So I started to notice something about some of these independent journalists. So you may know there is a news source called Mo News, Moshe, Mosheh. Moshe, I don't know that I can pronounce his last name, but it begins with a Y. It's super long. I think he's got an Israeli descent. But his background is as a CNN in multiple source, maybe ABC, CNN, I think both of them, news journalists. So really well-respected news journalists, took it all in-house. He is an independent journalist. He makes his living through donors, through people like you and I supporting his platform, through his premium subscriptions, through subscription, and Instagram, TikTok as well. So what I noticed about Moshe, he does such a great job, very unbiased. And I think their tagline is, we help you figure out the news so you don't have to. And so they do very split. What's interesting about it is they get shit from both sides. And so anytime they say something and then they give like, here's what it means, here's why it is, here's what prompted this, you'll get the opposing party going, I knew it, you're a lefty, you're a righty, you're whatever. And then when he will do it on the other side, he will hear it. And so what's interesting is they have been kind of at 500,000 followers. I've watched them through the previous election. They were at 200, 300,000 followers. Right now, as of today, they're at 575,000 followers. And they've been doing this for years. They do incredible work, really, really great, unbiased news, and really kind of cover the spectrum of what is there. Conversely, there is a man named Aaron Parnas. So Aaron Parnas is, he was a former attorney. He is probably 26 years old. He's young. But he decided at the beginning of 2025 that he was going to go all in as an independent journalist. So he had a really esteemed background as a lawyer and as a practicing attorney, and then went into news journalist, but does it completely on his own as an independent journalist. And what's happened is his platform on Instagram has grown to 2 million followers in 1 year. And on TikTok, his platform is 4.7 million. I think he's around 1 million on Substack as well. What's interesting about Aaron reports, he does breaking news, and there have been charts where his news sources are beating CNN and MS Now or MSNBC. How wild is that? Independent journalist. He seems to be very credible. For me, he is somebody that I really trust and love listening to him, but he's more narrow. Like where Mo will report on everything under the sun, Mo News, Aaron will be more specific. He'll go deeper into the Epstein files. He is more left leaning with it. And so it made me wonder if you think about Mo, who has been just at it and more of, I wouldn't say middle of the road, but like they are unbiased news. But then when you have a bias or a point of view and you are responsible for breaking news, which Aaron Parnas has been, and really, really quickly growing. He's almost at 900,000 followers on Threads. And all of this has kind of exploded over the year because people are listening and they are watching. And so he is kind of doubling down on certain areas of interest where he is kind of covering everything, but not to the spectrum that Mo News is. So I thought that was really, really fascinating. I think that more mainstream outlets are going to focus more on talent-led distribution. Number 3, the direct-to-audience business model is growing. What does that mean? That means newsletters. Newsletters are all the rage these days. So when you think of Substack, you think of LinkedIn newsletters. If you are somebody that uses LinkedIn or posts on LinkedIn, you will see a larger push towards newsletters. And there are a couple of reasons why. So when you think about Substack has reported millions of paid subscriptions on their platform. And it has become a way for creators to monetize their thought leadership. There's been an explosion of it now. So when I think about political names, it's attracted a lot of high profile media and political names. The top 5 I pulled from Substack are Heather Cox Richardson, who is known to report the news, but also with historical context in it. Robert Reich, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. The Free Press, Barry Weiss, Bulwark, and Midas Touch. Also, Aaron Parnas is on there. And what we're finding, at least the prediction of 2026, is more independent journalists are going to include 3 really major components. One is the newsletter. So, when I told you a direct to audience business model, newsletter plus podcast plus community. What that means, that trifecta, means that they want more of a discourse with their community. So when you think about mainstream media or somebody broadcasting, it wasn't like a conversation. They were reporting the news, especially back in the old days. Now it is a conversation. There are fewer articles going out, meaning if you're thinking about blog posts or articles of like one way kind of medium, that's not it anymore. It's more a relationship media. There are more Q&As, there are more live chats, there are more members only explainers, behind the scenes, those kind of things. People have put a premium on it. And really the focus, and I've seen this in podcasts too, is on bi-directional relationships. So when you are somebody that is reporting in the media, whether it is as a podcaster or as independent media creator, that bidirectional relationship is something that I've noticed over the past year is massive. So for me, and when I work with my clients, like I said, I'm a podcast strategist. So I work with founders, personal brands, entrepreneurs. Generally speaking, what I'm doing is I'm helping them launch a podcast that is integrated with their business, but surrounded by their thought leadership. And one of the key things that we do together is how do we make it engaging? How do we invite the listener to be part of the conversation, not just you talking at them, that it is, by nature, a one-way, a one-way broadcast, right? We want it bidirectional. And so shameless plug, if you are interested in a podcast this year or maybe you have a podcast where you're looking to like really build engagement and community around it and haven't figured out what that is, I would invite you to schedule a free call with me. You can go to AllisonHare.com/free call. And let's talk about your idea, no obligation, but an opportunity for you to get clarity on what that looks like. I'll put it in the show notes. So that's number 3. Newsletters are really interesting on it. Number 4 is that local news has an edge still. So when people are thinking about trust, local news still has an edge over national. I guess that would make sense. So Pew Research did a study in October 2025, and they showed that 70% trust local news, whereas 56% of U.S. adults say they have some trust in national news. So I thought that was interesting. When I think about local news, it's not something I watch unless there's like a weather event or something that is hyper local or a hyper, I don't know, emergency, I should say, or some kind of catastrophe that is nearby. I will tune in. But when I think about, I kind of think of it as like FM radio. What I'm surprised by when I look at charts of where advertisers are spending their money or where people are listening, FM radio still has a presence. And it's still a very significant presence that it is not dead by any means. I just wouldn't have thought of that. And I guess that was the same thing when it came to local news. What else was interesting is political affiliation and trusted sources. So, this is something I love to think about is the patterns that are noticeable within political affiliations and platforms. So, what they found is that Democrats are more likely to than Republicans to say they get their news from Instagram, from TikTok and Reddit, while YouTube is more evenly dispersed. When I started looking at the trends and the charts, and I can put this on the screen too, when it comes to partisanship, X and True Social were kind of even in their behavior, but X was far greater. It is the highest form of where people are hanging out in the Republican or right-leaning party. X is where they're at. I thought it would be similar to True Social, but it's actually kind of far. It is far over there, which I thought was interesting too. There are also some unusual signals that are emerging for 2026 that I thought was worth reporting. One of them is that Discovery is shifting from social feeds to forums again. And what that means is Reddit is dominating. And this was so fascinating that the reason why people are shifting away from social media is because of AI, because it's hard to figure out what is the truth anymore. And so Reddit, because there is like people's actual opinions and discourse and conversation on it, Reddit is crushing right now. Um, I think also that the source confusion is kind of becoming a norm as well. And what that means is that we hear so much, we are so flooded that we may not be able to even cite our sources anymore. And there is also the tactic of flooding the zone. So when you think about like, there's so much news coming at me all the time, all the time, all the time. I don't even know what's true anymore. That is designed to confuse you. It is done by design. Why is that? Because when you make it so confusing where the design is to fatigue you enough where you just don't want to fight anymore. You don't want to bother with it. You want to move on. That's why the news cycles are so crazy that it was January 3rd. And by January 3rd, there were already 3 mass shootings in the US by January 3rd. What the fuck? Right? Did you hear about it? Probably not. Probably not. And so that flooding the zone, the source confusion, all of that stuff, I think it's important that in the rise of synthetic media and deepfakes, you're going to see a lot of things that are actually going to be cited on screen now. And so I think it is important. I mean, obviously, you're listening to the show. You are smart. You are not easily duped. You are somebody that is, going to be intelligent about how you get your news. I just wanted to remind you, that sometimes when you do, there is a gut reaction when you see something shocking to go, oh my God, not again. Or what? They said what? and tell all your friends, you just want to take a moment to check the sources, make sure they're credible. I think there are some sources that kind of sound, it's almost like a knockoff Rolex, like a Molex, where it might sound like the New York Times or something. You know, you just have to be careful of where are these sources? Are they credible? Are they reputable? Obviously, when you think of the more unbiased ones, they're always going to be Reuters, AP, BBC. I thought that was fascinating how many people rely on foreign news to report on US news because there is no emotion in it. It isn't necessarily spin and opinion, which is what people, you know, look to the news for. They want, I think in America, we want we kind of get addicted to these explainer videos. So I think what'll happen, obviously you want to check who shares it. Does it match your prior beliefs? Whether it feels verifiable, screenshots, receipts, all of those things are really important. It's going to be even more important as well. And even to challenge your favorite news sources or independent news sources of, hey, can you please cite the source if it wasn't on it? On it, because it's easy to share things quickly. So you want to be mindful of that as well. I also think what has happened is that influencers and personalities are seen as a major driver of misleading information, alongside politicians, of course. So I don't know. I kind of think that the days of the influencer are really going to be shifting. And when I think about deepfakes and AI, I have seen a couple of things that I think are kind of alarming. And again, like AI is exploding. We're all using it. It's harder and harder to tell what's real and what's fake. And I saw that there are like completely full AI podcasts, totally not real, but they have ads and sponsors and they're doing, and so when you think of the influencer, do you really need somebody on your yacht or on your boat or whatever it is to promote it when you can have somebody who is like impossibly hot with a great voice, laughing, sounding just like anybody, else and selling your stuff for you? I think it's going to really kind of shift the apple cart a little bit over what that looks like. And even me as a podcaster, there's so many AI podcasters that, I mean, are they my competition now? I even read an article this morning that there was suspicion that Joe Rogan um, is cloned his voice to read his sponsor ads for him. So it kind of brings up, is there a question of ethics? Even if he might have um, sponsored it, I don't know, or condone it or approved it because it saves him time. So it's hard to know where the line is, but we have to be more vigilant with it. So all this to say, platforms can often lead to more echo chamber kind of stuff. It's like more identity reinforcement, depending on the platforms that you're in. And sometimes it just feels comfortable to have somebody kind of sharing what you believe as well. And when you think about this, is where I think this is really important when it comes to the news. Again, like I mentioned, I find myself craving it. I want to know more. I want to know how I can get involved. And really, the only way culture changes is not necessarily from the news. It's from the discussions you have in your own circles. It comes from the conversations that happen in it. The echo chambers, I mean, you can't just bury your head in the sand for everybody that doesn't believe believe the way that you do. And I think there is a call this year, especially for courage, for bravery, for standing on your beliefs and having discourse about it. having real conversations with it. I know personally, in my family, we're probably split politically, and in our family events, like we're not trying to convince each other that, like the other one is wrong or that we are right. We just don't necessarily acknowledge it in some cases. But there are people in my life that we do have discussions where we disagree, but there's so much respect on both sides of like, hey, I want to know you as a human. I want to acknowledge you as a human first and figure out how do we go forward together. So I would love for you to be brave and bold and stand on what you believe in, have those meaningful conversations. Send me a DM on Instagram. Let me know how this hit you or where you get your sources for. What did, your news sources? Who do I need to know about? What hit you? What was surprising to you? Whatever it is, I just want to talk to you and understand what makes things better. And what we're going to do is that I'm going to be doing more series on this, that we are inviting some really big hitters in the news world to discuss this on a deeper level of how can we kind of brace ourselves where we can bravely go forward in the world, understand as best we can. Am I right about everything I believe? Who the fuck knows? I'm doing my best, and I'm sure you are as well with the sources that you have. Obviously, I don't want to be duped. I don't want to be brainwashed as well. And I don't know. Like, I think it's just part of who we are that we're all kind of trying to navigate this. And I think having a level of humanity and compassion for people that are all trying to figure out, how do we get through this together? How do we figure out what's worth paying attention to and what can we kind of skip over? Where do you plant your flag and make a difference? And again, that difference is made in the conversations within your own circles. That's how these ideas get spread, is by you sharing it. And so I will invite you to share this episode for any of your news junkie friends or people that are news shy, or kind of keep their feelings and their opinions to themselves. I'd love to talk to you if you are new to me. And if you aren't, I'd still love to hear from you anyway. But all of this to say, if you're wondering, what do I do with all of this? Well, you might just be a culture changer. And maybe it's time to fuck some shit up together. Thanks for listening. If you liked today's episode, there are several ways to support the show. As an independent media creator, your engagement helps me continue to make it for you and keep it free. First, please rate and review the show on the platform where you listen. Also, I'm on YouTube, so if that's your jam, go there too. And consider sharing this episode with a friend or five. That's how it grows, by sharing these ideas. Second, please sign up for my email where I send out a short personal note to you every week, and always with a sprinkle of snark and some best finds. You can sign up at allisonhair.com/email. As always, thanks for listening, and let's rise up because we are culture changers.